I think it will convince the police that someone tried to kill you, certainly. But it's hard to see how they can link it to Denham or your wife without more evidence, I thought for a moment. Okay, thanks. What else did you find out? David is done with your computer, and his financial people think they've succeeded in something. They need another day or two to be sure. It looks like someone has been withdrawing money for 8 months, starting a little over a year ago, through some dummy subsidiary. Maybe $2 million was stolen, no more. Then the whole thing was quietly shut down. David's sure he can trace it back to a certain computer in your office if you give him a little more time. Why do the unscrupulous individuals in our society, the deceivers, swindlers, and fraudsters, often find success? My conclusion is that the fault lies within the rest of humanity. The majority of us are fundamentally honest and decent. We generally uphold truthfulness and treat others with kindness. However, this inherent goodness also makes us susceptible to exploitation by those who lack any moral compass. Their ability to deceive is magnified by our assumption that most people are similarly upright. Consequently, we may be blindsided by their deceit, unable to fathom their duplicity due to our own integrity. It was through a painful experience involving Gina Ganopoulos, now Gina Ganopoulos McMillan, that I learned this lesson. I am Alex McMillan, her former husband. One day, upon hearing unsettling noises from my Lexus engine, I entrusted it to Marshall Motors, where Dominic had been servicing my vehicles for a decade. His midday call did not reassure me. Instead, he summoned me to the premises urgently. In a secluded office, he delivered grave news. While the engine was sound, the brake line had been tampered with. Sufficient hydraulic fluid remained for routine stops, but any sudden or steep deceleration risked catastrophic failure. I was stunned into silence. 6 months earlier, Gina and I had moved into a new swanky modern house in the suburbs. It was gorgeous, with cathedral ceilings and lots of glass, and it was surrounded by quiet woods. But it was also at the end of a cul-de-sac off the main street that ran steeply down the hill. If I had driven my car home that evening, I would almost certainly have been killed. After a couple of minutes, I gathered my thoughts a bit. Dominic, do me a favor, okay? Don't tell anyone about this yet. Have you fixed it yet? No. Boy, a crime has been committed here, or at least attempted. I've got to call the police. Okay, I thought some more. How about we do this? Take a picture of the brake line and write everything up like you would for the police, but let's not call them yet. Just leave the car in the backyard, and I'll rent one of those clunkers you keep for a few days. There are security cameras on the property, right? Yes, Dominic looked doubtful. Here's the thing, whoever did this will want to cover it up when they find out I'm not dead. That's why I'm willing to bet they'll try to steal this car from the parking lot in the next few nights. I don't want to call the police until that happens. In the meantime, we'll have camera footage we can give them. 45 minutes later, I got out of the rented blue Corolla and left it at my driveway. I took the day off to think about what had happened. The attempt on my life had to be about money. I was president and co-founder of Apex, a $6.8 billion software company in Silicon Valley, and my first guess was that someone wanted to get me out of the way as part of an attack on the company. Carmelita, our cook and housekeeper who usually worked from noon to 8 p.m., had the day off, and the house was quiet. Gina must have gone shopping or played tennis. I wandered aimlessly around the house, going over in my mind the possible culprits and reasons for what was happening. Picking up the phone, I spoke to Jeff Denham, an old friend of mine who runs the security firm Apex uses. Without explaining my reasons to him, I made it clear that I suspected some kind of problem, either some financial irregularities already underway or a future attack on the company. We agreed that his financial experts would do a full audit of our computers and financial records. I gave Jeff a temporary password that would allow his people to access everything they needed from a desktop in my office and told him I wanted it done discreetly. We would tell everyone that they were doing a routine audit. Then I called Meredith, my secretary of many years, and told her to enter a temporary password into my computer and that Jeff's SK would be coming over later in the day. With that done, I resumed my aimless wanderings. I went to our home computer and poked around, not expecting to find anything. Out of pure idle curiosity, I tried to open some of Gina's files, including her email, and to my surprise, they were all password protected. What could Gina possibly have on our computer that she wouldn't want me to see? Unless you counted something unlikely, like planning a surprise party. I couldn't imagine. I made a mental note to ask her about it later. I was drinking tea in the kitchen at about 4:30 when Gina walked in. She took one look at me and practically fainted. I had never seen anything like it. Her mouth opened, she turned white, and her body collapsed against the door jamb. "Alex, what are you doing here?" I smiled softly. "Actually, honey, I live here, remember?" She pulled herself together and sat down at the table across from me. Forcing herself to smile, she said, "Sure, babe, it's just, well, you're hardly ever home this early, and I haven't seen your car outside." It all happened in an instant. I was about to tell her all about the brake line, but instead, I just said, there was a problem with the engine, and I had to leave it at Dominic's for a few days. He rented one of their clunkers to me. That's what's in the driveway. Why didn't I tell her the truth at the time? I think I thought it was because I didn't want to worry her. I didn't want to say, "By the way, honey, someone is trying to kill me." Why scare your wife? But when I thought about it later, the reason was something else entirely. Why was she so shocked to see me in the kitchen? Not just surprised, but stunned, as if it were the most unexpected thing in the world. I didn't understand her reaction, and the more I thought about it later, the more it gnawed at me. "Oh," she said, and I could see her trying to pull herself together. "It's great to have you back so early. What do you want to do about dinner? Why don't we go out now that Carmelita's gone?" "Great," she said. "Now I'm going to take a shower, and maybe we'll go to Andante." Then she quickly left the room, and a couple of minutes later, I heard the shower running. I put the cup in the sink and headed for the bedroom, deciding to wash up and change into something more casual before we went out. The door to the bedroom was almost closed, and to my surprise, as I approached, I heard Gina talking on the phone in a low, urgent voice. Why did she need to turn on the shower and then call someone? I didn't hear the ringing, so she must have called herself. I didn't hear anything special, just no, Dow, I have no idea. No, of course not. Yeah, we'll have to. Okay, baby, bye. Not much, but more than enough to make me freeze in place. She was talking to Jeff Denham, my friend and security guru. His middle name was Dow, and I'd called him Dowell since about 8th grade. Gina had adopted that nickname from me, so there was no doubt who was on the other end of the line. I waited until she hung up the phone and headed for the bathroom. Then I waited another 2 minutes before I went into the bedroom and changed. I washed my face in the guest bathroom so as not to disturb Gina's shower. My mind was spinning with thoughts. What the hell was going on? Could Gina and my friend Jeff have had something to do with what happened to my car? Despite all the events of the last 10 minutes, it seemed quite impossible. Gina and I had been married for 8 years. I was 46, she was 37. I had been married and divorced once before when I was 20 and had 2 wonderful children whom I saw only on summer vacations and visited occasionally because their mother had moved them 2,000 miles away after the divorce. I first saw Gina when she was touring the Apex offices while working as a sales rep for a computer support firm we did business with. I decided to find out who she was and then arrange a lunch date with a friend from her company who might happen to know us. It was worth the effort. Even if you woke her from a sound sleep, Gina would be one of the 10 most beautiful women you've ever seen. And when she has time for clothes and makeup, she's simply stunning. Nearly 6 feet tall, with long raven black hair and dark eyes, high cheekbones, a bold mouth, and a trim athletic body. She also has a look, a way of walking, moving, presenting herself, looking you in the eye, that says, "I know I'm sexy, and I know you think so too." From my very first interest in her, I knew I would have a lot of competition, and it was a pleasant surprise that we soon started dating, then dating seriously, and about a year later, got engaged and married. I'm not bad looking, but I'm not handsome, and I'm 9 years older than Gina. I knew that my success in business and my money had to be part of her attraction, and it didn't bother me. Why be successful if it's not going to help you hook up with gorgeous women? We had an ironclad prenup that said she could get no more than $1 million if we divorced in less than 20 years, so I was sure she loved me as much as she loved my money. We would have a very good life together, and if she enjoyed being rich with me, that was fine, as long as it also made me happy. Gina made me very happy. She spent a lot of money, but I had it, so that wasn't a problem. She was energetic and upbeat, very outgoing and full of fun. She made lots of friends, dragged me to lots of parties, and flirted with lots of guys, but at the end of the night, she would come home with me and usually have a blast. Gina was experienced and enthusiastic. She was as adventurous in bed as she was in everything else. She loved hang gliding, rock climbing, and things like that. She would drive me to exhaustion, and I was perfectly happy with that. But the events of the last few hours had changed everything, or at least threatened to change everything. I had to think hard, primarily because Dee seemed to be involved in this case. Under other circumstances, he would have been the first person I would have called. In fact, I had already called him and asked his people to start looking into Apex's finances. Now I realized that I may have made the wrong move in alerting him to the fact that I had some suspicions. Thank God I hadn't mentioned that the car had been broken into. Neither he nor Gina knew that I knew about it, at least not yet. That evening, I put my acting skills to the test. Gina and I went to Andante, where we had a good dinner and a nice bottle of Chianti. I was incredibly anxious, but tried my best not to appear withdrawn or aloof. I kept the conversation flowing, and when Gina took off her shoe and ran her foot over my leg under the table, I responded with a smile and a few discreet caresses. I knew the evening would end with athletic exercise in bed. That was Gina's habit after a nice dinner with good wine. I pondered how to proceed. One of my talents is the ability to ponder a problem with part of my mind while I am doing other things, like having dinner with my wife. So when I got up the next morning, I knew exactly what I was going to do to deal with the mysterious attempt on my life and my wife's obvious involvement in it. I woke up early and got busy preparing for a quick trip to Los Angeles. I packed an overnight bag, asked the company travel agent to book me on the usual 3-day round-trip flight, and a room at the Beverly Wilshire Hotel where I always stayed in Los Angeles. I called a limo to the airport, had a quick breakfast, then went to the bedroom and woke up my wife. "Baby, I'm sorry for bothering you." I smiled at her and enjoyed the sight of her beautiful face as her eyes slowly opened and she smiled back at me. "Good morning, Alex." "I need to go to LA, honey," I said. "I got some emails this morning about a meeting we were trying to set up. It all came together unexpectedly, and I need to be there for a couple of days." It was a lie, but a very believable one. I traveled frequently, and business trips often came up at short notice. "All right, sweetheart. I'll warm the bed for you. You'll be back on Friday?" "Yeah, that's the plan. Just make sure you're the only one keeping the bed warm, okay, Gina?" She laughed out loud and then hugged me tightly. "There's no one here but me, baby." In the limo, I marveled at my wife's ability to lie to me. Either I was completely wrong, and she had nothing to do with the attempt on my life, or she was a damn fine actress. More than that, a cold-blooded monster. I hoped I was wrong, but I didn't see how it could be. During the short flight from San Jose to Los Angeles, I worked out some of the details of my plan. The key was total secrecy. Since Jeff Denham was apparently involved in the case, I had to avoid any action that might tip him off to my suspicions. And since he was the top security expert in the entire Bay Area, that meant bringing in someone from afar. As I took a cab from the airport, I went into an electronics store and paid cash for a discarded cell phone. Then, after checking into the Beverly Wilshire Hotel, I called Dan Cameron and arranged to meet him for lunch outside his downtown office. Dan had been my right-hand man when I founded Apex, and we'd both gotten rich when it took off. We had parted amicably 3 years earlier. He had moved to Los Angeles with his family and taken a job with a financial services company that, thanks to his brains, was doing very well. Dan and I saw each other a couple of times a year, so it didn't seem strange to anyone that I was visiting him. We sat over sandwiches and a couple of beers in the restaurant's outdoor patio, reminiscing about old times and sharing stories of recent challenges and triumphs. He asked about Gina, told me about his wife Linda, and what their children were doing. But when we finished eating, I leaned forward and spoke more seriously. "I'd like to ask you for a couple of favors, Dan, if you don't mind." He looked interested, so I continued. "I have reason to believe that I may have some problems inside Apex. Do you have a security firm you trust absolutely?" "Yes," he said, "Vertex Securities. Alan Newman, who heads it, is a first-rate specialist. But you still have Jeff Denham, don't you?" "Yes, but I need someone on the outside. Here's my first favor, call Newman and tell him a good friend would like to talk to him on the phone and get some advice, but without mentioning my name." Without hesitation, Dan called on his cell phone and arranged to meet his friend later that day. "Thank you, Dan. I'm going to ask you to forget that this ever happened at all. Now, one more request of mine. In fact, it's a question I want to ask you. In the time you've known Gina, have you ever seen her acting inappropriately or suspiciously at all?" To my amazement, Dan looked away, and his face reddened. I waited, and finally, he looked at me again, a more guilty expression on his face than I'd ever seen before. "Alex, it's hard, you know? It's a little awkward. I hope you don't want to hit me. About 4 years ago, in the last few months before I resigned as COO and moved here, Gina had several times flirted with me. It wasn't just normal flirting, something beautiful women do all the time. On several occasions, she came very close to propositioning me. There must have been a look of surprise on my face because Dan raised his hands defensively, as if he thought I might actually hit him. It wasn't obvious, Alex. She never said, 'Do you want to take me to bed?' or anything like that. She came close to that line, but always subtly enough that it wasn't obvious. The offer was one that I could accept, but if I pretended not to understand, it was ambiguous enough that neither of us felt uncomfortable. That's why I never talked to you about it. It was very strange to me, believe me, but I didn't want to infuriate you, me, or her when it was so hard to explain. I was afraid you'd think I was making it all up." For a moment, he sat down with an unhappy look. "I think I understand, Dan, and I'm not mad at you, so you just let the subtle invitations pass your ears," and after a while, she backed off. "That's right, it went on for a few weeks, and then it just stopped. Gina went back to being the friendly, slightly flirtatious woman she used to be. It was weird, like she was experimenting on me or something. And was there anything else, any other strange behavior you noticed?" He nodded, still looking unhappy. "It's even worse than that, Alex. As soon as we moved here, Linda told me that she had a farewell dinner with Barbara Daniels, Josh's wife. Barbara was very upset. She told Linda that Josh had been cheating on her, and she was pretty sure it was with Gina. Josh Daniels had been at Apex for 7 years and was now our CFO. I leaned forward. "How did Barbara know?" "She didn't know, wasn't sure. She'd caught Josh lying to her a couple of times about his whereabouts, and there were some other things that convinced her he was cheating. As for Gina, it was much more vague. Maybe he came home smelling like her perfume one day or something. I don't remember all that, but I know for a fact that Linda and I wrestled with the question of whether to let you know about it together. I know for a fact that if she ever had an affair behind my back, I'd want my friends to tell me about it. But the thing is, it was all so lame. I hope I didn't make a mistake, but I didn't want to ruin your marriage over something that probably never happened in the first place." We talked for a few more minutes, and then we parted. I wasn't angry with Dan. It was clear that he had done what he thought was right at the time. But his stories reinforced the idea that my wife was at the center of a conspiracy against me and my company. My phone conversation with Alan Newman was short and sweet. As soon as he got on the line, I got straight to the point. Mr. Newman, I need a top-notch security firm to help me with a confidential problem. As highly as Dan speaks of you, I wouldn't want it to be someone associated with me or my friends, so I'm wondering who else in this field is really good. Who would you hire yourself to handle a very serious, very confidential matter requiring financial and computer expertise? Newman thought for a minute and said, the first thing I would do is call Barry Azimov in San Diego. His firm and mine have worked together on some things. He's incredibly smart, hires good people, and pays them well, and I've always been able to trust him. At my request, Newman hung up the phone, put me through to Azimov, and arranged a meeting for the next morning at 10 a.m., again without mentioning my name. Back at the hotel, I called Dan Cameron again. I asked him to rent a car from Hertz on his credit card and arrange for his friend Elliot to come pick up the car at the airport the next morning. That way, I would have the car, and it wouldn't be traceable back. Back at the Beverly Wilshire, I had a quick dinner, went upstairs, had my usual late-night conversation with Gina, and went to bed. The next morning, after having breakfast in my room, I dressed in slightly worn sweatpants, sunglasses, and a San Francisco Giants baseball cap, and left the hotel through a side entrance and caught a cab to the Hertz office at the Los Angeles airport. By 9:45, I was in San Diego and parked in the parking lot next to the Azimov office. Barry Azimov was a short, fat man in his 40s. He had a bad comb-over, and his brown suit didn't fit him very well. In short, he was a completely unimpressive figure. But within 10 minutes, I realized that he was one of the smartest people I had met in a long time. I knew I had to confide in someone, so I decided it would be Azimov. I got straight to the point. Mr. Azimov, I need a security firm that can do a serious assignment for me. It's a non-standard case, it will require a lot of high-tech computer work, and it's extremely confidential. I am willing to pay well for what I need, as well as cover all of your people's expenses. The job could take several weeks, and I wouldn't be surprised if your fee is in the 7 figures. For a few moments, he stared at me intently. Why did you decide to turn to us, and why do you think we're up to the task? Someone recommended me to Alan Newman, and Newman spoke highly of you. Why not just use Newman? He's really good. Because I'm trying to cover my tracks. When we figure this out, you'll understand why. I have good reason to be vigilant. Newman called you on my behalf, but he never got my name, so it's going to be pretty hard for someone to trace me back to you. Not impossible, but difficult. We talked some more about the preliminary preparations, and then Azimov said, let's hear the story. If this sounds like something we can handle, then we're in business. I told him everything, who I was, what Apex did and what it was worth, and about the recent attempt on my life. I told him that I suspected Gina and Denham were involved and why, and I repeated Dan Cameron's account of Gina's behavior and her possible affair with Josh Daniels, although I never once mentioned Cameron's name. When I finished, Azimov asked me a few clarifying questions. He clearly knew his business. Then he leaned back in his chair. I know Jeff Denham, at least by reputation. He's considered very cool. A lot of Silicon Valley folks swear by his work. So, if he's really doing something questionable, we're going to have to be very delicate in our search for him. We talked some more, and finally, Azimov said, here's what I'll advise you. Basically, you need 2 things. Someone to go through your books, internal documents, and memos very carefully, and someone else to check out Denham, your wife, and other high-ranking people at Apex. David Karros is my best computer guy. I'll give him the first assignment. He's got 2 or 3 financiers working for him. They can analyze what they find. And I'll have Vera Anderson put together a surveillance team for the second part of the case. 30 minutes later, the 4 of us were sitting in a conference room, eating takeout sandwiches and discussing my situation. Azimov mostly stayed out of it, letting Karros and Anderson ask questions, but every now and then, he would throw in his 2 cents, and I never ceased to be amazed at his wit. I couldn't help feeling that I was in good hands. By mid-afternoon, I was on my way back to Los Angeles. To my relief, Azimov understood why I couldn't give him a large fee right away and was willing to trust me on the basis of a promissory note drawn up by a notary in his office. Karos was going to dig into Apex through my computer, which was connected to the firm's other important computers. His method was simple. He had me memorize the URL of the MO firm's website. Whenever I was alone in my office for 2 hours or more, I would go to that web address, download, and install on my computer a program from the site. This software allowed Karos and his team to download and copy any files they wanted to view from my computer and those to which it was connected. Whenever I needed to leave the office, I closed the connection, logged out of the website, deleted the program from my computer, and covered my tracks in the usual way, deleting my browser history and so on. This method was not completely traceable, but only an expert who already suspected and scrutinized my computer would be able to figure out what was going on. Karos estimated that in 20 hours of searching the web, he'll be able to find and download everything he needs to see if anything is wrong with Apex. Anderson's responsibilities were the usual surveillance of Gina and the senior management of Apex. We had agreed not to set up surveillance on Denham since he, as a security person, would likely notice the attention, no matter how good the people at Azimov were. But she had people digging through phone calls and credit card records, and it was done at a safe distance so Denham wouldn't find out. I emphasized to them that Denham was no fool. Following him or trying to tap his phone, his home, or office would be a very bad idea. I bet he'll be onto us within a day or so, I said. Understood, Vera replied, but I'd like to set up audio and video recording in your house as well as a bug in Gina's purse and a tap on her cell phone. We agreed that I'd let them know when the house was empty. She promised her team could do the job in no more than 3 hours. The first thing they'll do is sweep the house to make sure Denham hasn't installed any surveillance equipment. As for Gina's purse and phone, I gave them the address of her tennis club. Vera assured me that it wouldn't be hard to pick the lock of her locker, quickly check her purse and phone for bugs, and plant my own. My role in this case was simple: go home and pretend everything was fine. To go on with my normal life at work and at home without letting my guard down. Azimov was confident that whoever tried to kill me would wait a little while before making another attempt. At the very least, they'll have to make sure your Lexus is destroyed so that no evidence of the first attempt remains. And in a few days, we should have enough information to figure out what's going on. So don't do anything stupid, Alex. Don't go into the woods or go into unfamiliar places. You might even try not to drive alone. Find an excuse to have Gina drive you to work, that sort of thing. But I don't think you need to worry right away. I smiled ironically at him. That's easy for you to say, Barry, but I'll be as careful as I can be. Before I left them, we worked out a communication system. It would be one way from me to Azimov. I continued to use the discarded cell phones. When I was free to call, I would dial a number and ask for Larry Azimov. The receptionist at the front desk would correct my mistake and then transfer the call directly to Barry. We agreed that I would try to call at least once every other day. Back at the Beverly Wilshire, I had dinner and then called Gina to let her know I'd be home a day early. On the phone, she animatedly told me how lonely and cold she was in our big bed, and I promised to keep her warm on Thursday night. As I hung up the phone, I realized how crazy my wife's plot to kill me seemed. Before all of this started, I would say I had no illusions about Gina. She was beautiful, adventurous, and energetic, but she was also narcissistic and a little cold. She was not a heartbreaker who sheltered stray cats. Her number one interest was Gina, and it didn't take long to know her to realize that fact. And yet, I would say that she loved me in her own way. She was not a warm, caring wife, but neither was I a particularly affectionate husband. We didn't often snuggle up to each other by the fireplace or take leisurely walks on beautiful beaches, except for the occasional Caribbean vacation when we made love during the day and went out to dinner in casinos in the evening. We were both ambitious, goal-oriented people. Even though Gina was no longer working, she was energetically pursuing the things that interested her: tennis, shopping, spending time with friends. I would say that, in her own way, Gina loved me. In fact, I would say that Gina loved me as much as anyone could love anyone, given her basic nature and given my own nature. That was enough for me. I liked our life together. I was content. But as it was, all of those assumptions were now hanging in the balance. Although it shocked me to think that she might be trying to kill me, the preliminary evidence definitely pointed that way. It wasn't hard to come up with a motive of money. Stupid. And if what Dan Cameron had told me was true, she could be connected to at least two of my partners, Josh Daniels from Apex and my friend Jeff Denham. In other words, if my worst suspicions were correct, she was a monster, cold-blooded, heartless, vicious. If she was really sleeping with Daniels, trying to seduce Cameron, and somehow connected to Denham, it suggested that she was the driving force behind the whole thing. All the way on the plane to San Jose, I thought about how this could all turn out. I was sure I could be a good enough actor to fool Gina for a while if she really was fooling me. It would be a challenge to see if I could do it just as well. And if, by some miracle, it turned out that my suspicions were wrong, I would be more than happy to open my heart to her love again. But if she was behind the attempt on my life, let's just say I already had some ideas about how I wanted the endgame to develop, and part of me was looking forward to it. Our reunion with Gina on Thursday night was great in several ways. First, the sex was amazing. She ordered Chinese food because she knows I love it. The second reason Thursday pleased me is that there was nothing special about it. As you can imagine, I watched Gina very closely to see any sign of guilt, anxiety, or weariness, but there was none of that. She acted as usual, talking about how she beat Shar and Combe 6-4 in the third set, how she found the shoes she wanted but unfortunately in the wrong color, and so on. I was sure she had no idea of my suspicions. When I arrived at the office on Friday, Jeff Denham had already called to say he was on his way over. No surprise there. Presumably, he wanted to report on the audit I had requested. Moreover, I was sure he would want to find out why I had asked for it. He would want to make sure I had no suspicions about what he was up to. Jeff walked in with a smile on his face, shook my hand, and said, "Hey man, how do you like LA?" I immediately wondered how he'd heard about my impromptu trip. Maybe he'd talked to Gina, but I wasn't going to make him suspicious by asking about it. And he could call the office and find out from Meredith anyway. "Hey, Denham," I replied with a smile. Things were good in LA. Dan Cameron thought he had a lead for me on the new account, but I'm not sure it's going to work out. Still, it was good to see him. "Are you here to tell me what your guys found out?" He settled into the chair across from my desk. Yeah, it was routine. They found a couple of accounting errors, so minor stuff. I passed them on to Pogrebin downstairs. But there was no sign of suspicion, no leakage of funds, no new recipients, no evidence of outside interference. "What made you ask me to do the audit, Alex?" I watched Denham, and he seemed to be trying to make his question sound as casual as possible. It was a good thing I'd seen it coming and was ready for a lie. I was sure it was nothing, but on Monday, I heard from Bert Williamson of 2K2. One of his vice presidents was at a meeting in New York, and there was a guy there who said he'd heard that one of the Silicon Valley software firms was under attack. It was all very vague, something about fake subsidiaries to which money was being sent. It sounded like. But it's been a while since I asked you to check our accounts, so I thought, what the hell? Sorry to put your guys through that, but it's always better to know. He grinned, and I thought he relaxed a little. No problem, buddy. That's what you keep us in reserve for. We chatted for a few more minutes about nothing, and as soon as he left, I logged onto Carlos's URL, downloaded and installed his software, and let his guys start checking Apex's finances and communications. I wanted to give them as much time as possible, so I asked Meredith to order lunch, telling her that I would be eating at my desk today. She also brought me the San Jose Mercury News newspaper, which I hadn't had time to read that morning. And while I was eating my lunch, I was stopped by an article on the Metro page, "Auto Shop Fire Destroys 12 Cars." I read the article carefully. A fire broke out in the back parking lot of Marshall Motors. The police don't yet know what caused the fire, but it completely destroyed a dozen cars and damaged 6 or 8 others. I wasn't that shocked. I guessed someone would steal my Lexus, but burning it to the ground was just as bad, maybe even better because it hid which car was the target. I dialed Dominic, reminding myself to be very careful what I said. Barry and I both thought that DLE was probably bugging my office. Hi, Dominic. I just saw the Mercury News article. First of all, is everything okay? Alex asked. Yes, Alex, thank you. It was past 10 last night and no one was here, but if you're calling to inquire about your Lexus, I'm afraid I have some bad news. It's a total loss. It's okay, Dominic. That's what insurance is for. Is it okay if I drop by after work today for a few minutes? We agreed that he would stay here until I arrived at 6 p.m., and we stopped talking on the phone. I doubted that the security tapes at Marshall Motors could have picked up anything suspicious, but I was going to have Asimov's people check them to make sure. Thank God Dominic had written a report on the brake line and taken some pictures. Whoever had set my car on fire knew his business. Dominic walked me around the station as the police and the arsonist team gathered and drove away. They think it's suspicious, he said, but they doubt they can prove it. It looks like that old Ford truck parked next to your Lexus, he pointed to a mangled, blackened piece of metal, had a gasoline leak, and somehow a spark ignited it. The explosion set all the other cars on fire, he continued, waving his hand vaguely in the direction of the destruction. We were standing in a parking lot, hardly near a bug, so I quietly asked him, is there any surveillance footage from last night? Yes, from 2 different cameras, and the police took them away. But I thought you might want to see them, so I made a copy for you. They're in my office, in the drawer where we keep the coffee filters. God bless you, Dom. Now, I have one more favor to ask of you. A big one. I asked Dominic to wait until Monday and then send the surveillance footage and his initial report on the car with photos to Barry Asim's office. I told him the address and made him memorize it by repeating it several times. I also left my rented clunker at Dominic's, deciding that I would use cabs for a few days. If I pick them up in different places, acting spontaneously, it is very unlikely that any of them will turn out to be a trap. Walking to the nearest cab, I quickly called Larry, and within 2 minutes, I was talking to Barry Azimov. Nothing much was going on. Carlos had taken a bunch of stuff off my computer, but it would take him a few more hours to complete the download. I promised to try to get to the office over the weekend. Vera Anderson's team scoured my house for bugs, didn't find any, and installed their own. They had also cracked the password to Gina's computer and copied her files, though they hadn't read them yet and were ready to tackle Gina's purse the next time she played tennis. I told him about the fire at Marshall Motors and that he would have the records and report within a few days. We agreed that I would call back early the following week. The next 2 days were so ordinary that it was almost strange. Gina and I did the usual weekend things. We slept in on Saturday, made love in the morning, and then Gina made scrambled eggs and bacon. Breakfast was the only meal she liked to cook, so we usually had dinner out or Carita cooked for us. We fiddled around the table, feeding each other and giggling. It was also a good way to make sure she didn't poison the food. After lunch, we went to our clubhouse where I played golf with my usual foursome and Gina hung out with her girlfriends by the pool. We stayed at the club to have dinner on the terrace with our friends Sam and Ashley, and then headed home, where we made love again. On Sunday, we went our separate ways. I told Gina that I needed to spend part of the day at the office, which is not that uncommon. I asked her to give me a ride and headed to the club for tennis. I used my discarded cell phone to notify Barry, and he promised that Vera would bring her operative to the locker room while Gina played. I logged in, set up the program, and let Karos do his thing. I had a lot of time to think, in particular to wonder why I didn't get more angry. After all, my wife and my best friend seemed to be plotting to kill me, and Gina appeared to be having fun with me, at least with Josh Daniels if not the others. So why wasn't I blazing with rage? All I came to was, first, that I don't know for sure yet, and second, that revenge is a dish best served cold. Out of sheer curiosity, I looked it up on the internet. It turns out that the phrase belongs to some man I've never heard of, Pierre Ambroise François Coderlos de Laclos, back in the 18th century. Somehow, I managed to put my anger and sense of betrayal in a little box in one corner of my mind. I would have no trouble getting even or spending even a minute feeling sorry for Gina or Duh, but until I had the proof in front of me, I would not allow myself to lose my mind. At about 5:30, Gina came to pick me up, fresh from playing tennis, swimming, and showering. We bought some Indian food and had a quiet dinner at home. Neither of us seemed to want to make love, so we watched a couple of episodes of The Sopranos, which we had recorded at 2 and hadn't seen yet, and then went to bed. Such a normal weekend, like we've never had before. Nothing out of the ordinary happened on Monday either. I pretended to work in my office, setting up the software so David Karras could finish the download. But when I called Barry on Tuesday afternoon, sitting in the back booth of a downtown bar, I discovered that his people had made significant progress. I want to tell you a few things, Alex, starting with your car. It was arson, just as we suspected. It was committed by people who knew what they were doing, 2 guys dressed in black, wearing ski masks, so we'll never identify them. They made a tiny hole in the Ford's gas tank, then splashed some more gasoline they'd brought with them, making sure there was more under the Lexus. Then they threw a match and got the hell out of there. What about Dominic's photos and documents? Could that be evidence? I think it will convince the police that someone tried to kill you, certainly. But it's hard to see how they can link it to Denham or your wife without more evidence, I thought for a moment. Okay, thanks. What else did you find out? David is done with your computer, and his financial people think they've succeeded in something. They need another day or 2 to be sure. It looks like someone has been withdrawing money for 8 months, starting a little over a year ago, through some dummy subsidiary. Maybe $2 million was stolen, no more. Then the whole thing was quietly shut down. David's sure he can trace it back to a certain computer in your office if you give him a little more time. Is there any chance of a refund? You can't say for sure, but it's unlikely. The best chance is to find out who did it, take them to the police, and demand the money back. If the person who took the money has already spent it, it's probably gone forever. I didn't like the sound of it, but I knew that losing $2 million wasn't going to break me or the company. That was the principle, and it made me very angry. Still, compared to murder, losing money was a lot less serious. Is there any news on Gina? Did Vera's people get the bugs and get into her computer files? He cleared his throat. Things don't look good, Alex. I won't kid you. It looks like she was probably connected to 2 of the 3 Apex guys whose names you gave us, Josh Daniels and Eddie Kryler. And on Sunday, she called Denham from her cell phone, which makes it clear she's sleeping with him. Jesus, I said. I realized I wasn't that shocked, but it was still a blow to the head to get such a full confirmation of my suspicions all at once. Barry's voice distracted me from my gloomy thoughts. Look, give us a couple more days to figure all this out. Vera's people are monitoring Gina's cell phone, the bug in her purse, and the bugs in your house. They're also still working on her cell phone records and credit cards. Turns out she had 2 cards under her maiden name, and the monthly bills came to her mailbox. Did you know anything about that? Hell no, I replied, still feeling a little dazed. Alex, I know this really sucks. Do you think you can hold out a little longer and keep your cool while we wrap this up? I know I have to, Barry, so I guess I will. Do you think they'll come at me again? There was a short pause. Then he said, they might, but they'll be very careful because the news about your car is still so fresh. They won't want anyone putting 2 and 2 together. So if you take reasonable precautions, stay away from dark, lonely places and things like that, you'll be all right. Would you like me to put a couple of men on you? No, there's too great a chance that Denham's boys will pick up on it. No, I've got to take care of myself. I'll call you on Thursday. I'm sorry, Alex, he said in a surprisingly soft voice. Yeah, me too, I replied and hung up. Wednesday may have been the least fun day of my adult life. I knew my marriage was over. I knew that my best friend, a guy I'd known since junior high school who I trusted more than anyone else, was having fun with my wife. And I knew that one of them or both of them wanted to destroy me. That's what I carried inside me, and there was nothing I could do about it until there was no one I could tell about it. So I wandered aimlessly around the office, pretending to work, chatting with Meredith from time to time while my mind raced with the problem of how I was going to avenge myself. The details, of course, depended on what Barry and his team would find out, but the general outline of what I wanted to do was already clear in my mind.